Hello friends, Mike Amore, WCA. We are going to have the video presentation of the Karpov-Hort game that we studied in class. I am going to limit the analysis in the video because I printed it out, and you will see the notation and the annotations in the blog. By now you should all know the difference between the word notate and annotate. There's a big difference, and there are also words that you need to be able to use correctly as you study chess. Okay, so Karpov in this game is white, playing Hort in 1978. So, you know, in 78, Karpov was really in the prime of his chess career. I mean, just absolutely phenomenal chess player. We have a Caro-Kann, and here we discussed in class and in the blog the ways to directly challenge this knight here on e4. The main line of the Caro-Kann goes bishop to f5. You see you're gaining a tempo, and then white gets it right back by hitting your bishop, and black preserves the bishop. And in the main line you see these flank attack with pawns, and they're designed to simply trap the bishop or attempt to trap the bishop, and black will make a little escape hole, white will gain more space, the bishop runs, and then white will kind of trade off the light square bishops and try to play with this huge space advantage over here and see if they can make a go of it. Of course, these pawn moves that white plays, they're not for free. Black is very solid, and you have to be careful as white that you don't overextend and push too hard, which is really openings like the Caro-Kann are made for. You stay very solid, and you hope that your opponent pushes too far. But in our game, so after knight d2, pawn takes, knight takes, the knight goes to d7. This idea is to challenge this knight without getting a pawn weakness. So if you challenge it immediately with knight f6, and this is playable, as a matter of fact, it can lead to some very exciting games. The only problem here, of course, when white takes, black has to choose what type of weakness they want. If they take with the g pawn, let me give you a new variation, you see the structure has been compromised, but you have the g file and very active, interesting play. If you take the other way, and that would look like this, you have a very solid pawn structure here. As a matter of fact, the king, once he's castled, we've already talked about having that extra pawn to protect your king. There are some weaknesses, however. You see these three pawns down here, they can hold off these four. So if you get into some sort of endgame, this four, you see the four white pawns here against the three for black, that majority, white may be able to push a passed pawn through, or at least create some play on that side of the board where these doubled pawns might become a liability later on. I mean, that's later on. There's a whole middle game to play, of course. But here, Hort takes the middle ground and plays a move that Karpov actually specialized in the 1980s. He played knight to d7. The idea here is when you challenge this knight on f6, you're not going to have to weaken your pawn structure. So I'll show you exactly what I mean. So he takes here. Oh, I'm sorry, my computer is suddenly slowed to a crawl. Okay, we're back in business. So Karpov develops his knight, and here's the move I was talking about, knight f6. Karpov takes, Hort takes, and you can see the pawn structure for black stays the same. A pair of minor pieces come off the board. You know, you have less space with black. Yeah, let's trade a piece. It all looks good. And then Karpov moves the knight twice. And I'm highlighting those g6 and g4 squares for a very important reason. That knight having influence on those squares can set some positional traps, and in this case Hort kind of walks into one here. In 1978, you know, as chess theory is evolving, if you continued with the traditional bishop to f5, which is kind of the main square in a lot of Caro-Kann variations, you have to be very careful, because as Karpov demonstrates, with the move pawn to c3, it's giving black a chance to set up the traditional Caro-Kann pawn structure. And that should be a good thing, right? I mean, you set up a traditional structure. However, with the knight on e5, after the move e6, you'll see, my computer today, for some reason, is very upset at me. But I think we're good again. Okay, after e6, you have that typical Caro-Kann pawn structure. The problem is, you remember those two squares that I highlighted before up here? How about the move g4, which comes right now? After g4, the bishop is suddenly out of squares. The very natural bishop e4 attacking the rook gets met with f3, and you have to be careful where you put this bishop that you don't get trapped. So the move g4 is a surprising move. If you've never seen this before and you get hit with it over the board, it's quite surprising. So he plays bishop to g6, and then the h-pawn follows suit. And once that h-pawn comes up the board, the threat obviously is to play h5, and you can have some issues. So Hort plays h5 first and puts an end to that, but then Karpov wants to take this bishop up here, but plays this very nice in-between move, this move here, pawn to g5, which gains a ton of space and kicks the knight. The knight goes to d5, and once the knight goes to d5, now you take the bishop. And once you take the bishop, you're going to create a permanent weakness on the g6 square. This pawn is not going anywhere for a very long time. So what Karpov does, and he gives a great way to do this, is just simply goes after the weakness. Very, very simple. Queen to c2. Could you play bishop to d3? Yeah, you can, but the queen coming to c2 gives a little bit of flexibility to this piece. I mean, if you see that the bishop has other options available to it, and you know that the queen is really well placed here, why not put it on that square? Another reason for this move is, since you've made so many pawn moves on this side of the board, you may want to tuck your king in on the queen side. So playing queen to c2 gets you one step closer to that objective. So in this position, king f7 was played. Now the king commits himself. You could play knight e7, which is a very natural move and a move that Hort plays anyway later in the game. But now bishop c4, and you can see that the pressure on this e-pawn is going to start to build. White can continue with queen e4. You can lift the rook up and over. So Karpov just says, you know what? Hort, I'm going to just protect my pawn, because I have a feeling my king is going to have to come here anyway to guard the pawn. And here I love White's next move. In the blog, I put up in the puzzle area, it's not really a puzzle, it's just a question for you, why rook h3? This is one of those times where you have two minor pieces left on the back rank. You haven't castled your king. It's move 14. You still haven't castled your king or developed your minor pieces, but this is the nature of this position. It's kind of an odd one, or an interesting one, but not a typical setup for either side. So when you're in one of those games and you see those markers, they're warning you. You're driving in a car and you see a big sign that says danger, sharp curve ahead. What should you do? Well, the sign is there for a reason, right? You probably slow down, you put your lights on. You have to take care of what the sign is telling you. Well, here, you see a black king on f7. You see these broken pawns. Black isn't miles ahead in development, so there's a lot of interesting signs here. So when you see them, put them together, it probably indicates you're in an interesting, sharp position. So play that way. Rook h3 is more than justified here. It's a terrific move. You're getting to bring that rook into the game before a minor piece. Go for it. Okay? Really, really nice move. Okay, so after rook h3, it's pretty clear where that rook is going and where black will get attacked. So black backs the knight up, trying to come into this nice post on f5. Notice it's kind of like a semi-outpost because it doesn't have, there are no white pawns that can kick it. Like I mentioned earlier, Karpov gained all this space. But when you move pawns in the opening this much or this many times, you are going to leave some holes behind. And there's like a hole right here on f5. Okay, so now bishop c4, which not only pressures the e-pawn, but sets up a tactical idea that Karpov knows the knight is coming to f5, which it does. And now he swings the rook over. And can you see the tactical idea here of having the bishop on c4? Well, it's revealed on the next move. Queen to d7, and now the exchange sack. And as I mentioned earlier, I even put a quote by Karpov in the blog that Karpov always preferred the strategic path where there's logical sequencing as opposed to sharp tactical variations when there were equal chances for both. So let me be clear about that. If he saw a way to complicate a game with tactics or to continue with a solid positional path, he would choose the positional path. But in this position, playing slowly and developing your dark squared bishop, that's not the correct way to play. You have to play sharp chess here, and Karpov was always willing to do that if the time was right. So you have to accept, but notice you can't take with the e-pawn because of this pin. So when you take, you get a full exchange, now a full exchange minus a pawn. So queen takes f5, king goes to e7. You're guarding your e-pawn here, and you're gaining a tempo on the queen. And now after queen e4, I would highly recommend that you stop your video and spend some serious time looking at all the different forms of compensation in this position. There's more than one. It's not like, you're up a pawn and the other guy, has an open file. You can sack a pawn for an open file. You may have compensation, but here there is a great deal. You have to find it. I don't want to give it on the video. I just want you pause it and go through all the different stages and factors in this position that indicate Karpov's exchange was good. As a matter of fact, it was more than good. I mean, he's for all purposes, he's winning here. Ben, stop pointing. Okay, so queen e4. What to do is black. Well, the e-pawn is being attacked. So he puts his rook on the e8 square, kind of knowing that when the king moves, that pawn will be protected. And all looks pretty good. Now comes the bishop into the game and king to d8. Very important moment in the game. I cannot tell you how many games I have lost by missing black's next move. If you stop this video again and ask yourself, what is black's next move? Because what happens here is we see a position where the black king is kind of up at the top of the board. Black isn't developed. We sacked an exchange. In a real tournament game, your heart's racing a little bit. You're looking at the clock. You're looking for tactics. You're thinking everything is going great for you, and you forget the person on the other side is the one that received your sacrifice. They're the ones that have to fight off the initiative that you have. What do you think black would do if it were their turn now? That's so important. You have to stop thinking about your own game. You have to always ask, what is my opponent's next move? And if he gets a chance, he's going to play the move bishop to d6. Why would he do that? Because, for example, let's say we follow the classical rule and just castle our king. Like, why not? I was taught, develop the minor pieces. I just did that. Connect the rooks. Oh, I don't have a rook over here. Oh, that's right. I sacked an exchange. Well, I castle my king. It looks great. And then all of a sudden you get hit with bishop to d6. And look at the black rooks. Look at the black king. You see those dark squares that were there a moment ago that we were all over? After bishop to d6, I don't know. It looks so equal, or I don't know how to assess this position as compared to this one. In this position, it's clear to me that white has a huge advantage. What move should white play? Queen e5. Stops bishop to d6, stops the e-pawn from moving, and then one simple move, you have a threat coming in to b8, and the entire king side from black is without quality moves. So rook g8, preparing to move the g-pawn. Now he castles. You could have also put your king on f1. I think that was still playable, and then swing the rook to e1 that way. But Karpov just castles, and now g6 to activate the bishop, hit the queen. All looks good, right? And now the last piece hitting the sensitive spot, bishop to g7, all natural continuations. And here, since white is completely mobilized, he strikes with queen to b8 check. You could block the check. You'll probably get hit with queen d6, and if queen d7, you'll get a very similar idea from in the game. Rook e6 looks pretty good to me. You guys can go over this on your own. I'll just keep it short. So queen b8, king e7, and in this position, you definitely need to stop your video. White to play and win. And after rook takes e6, Hort resigns. I'm not going through all the variations. We did a couple in class. They're beautiful. You can finish it on your own. Okay? I hope you're learning something. Ben, stop pointing.